Let's talk about value streams. I mentioned them briefly in the introduction and said they were pretty important, but let's really describe them now and get some depth about this level of lean thinking that helps us rethink the flow of value throughout the organization, and frankly helps us rethink the way we want to be organized to deliver value. So we talked about the fact that there's a process whereby we're continuing, let's just say that e-commerce company, right, the example that we just used, the one that wanted to appeal to a younger demographic, they're always in the business of understanding their user needs and building solutions and deploy them. And each time they have one, the time from when they know that they wanted to, let's say, my apparel configurator from the desktop or the web app to the mobile app, once I've understood that I want to do that, the time it takes to actually deliver it is the lead time. That's how long it takes me on the average to do that. But this process repeats. So we're always in the process of thinking of new things, and we're always trying to monetize those things by delivering value, either collecting for value or maybe the retail apparel configurator isn't sold. It's going to really help us sell more. So that's the value stream. And we define it as the sequence of steps used to deliver value. And those steps, this is a generic case, but in our world, it can be a lot richer than that. Maybe I'm building a widget and the value stream looks differently. It's the whole sequence. So from concept to delivery, let's just use our configurators, our simple example. Let's just say our retail apparel configurator. I just made that up. I'll pretend like that exists. What does it take to do that? What people are involved? Who defines the user needs? What solutions are involved? How's that deployed? Gets deployed to the mobile device. It was already deployed to the web apps, et cetera. It's the whole thing, right? And our customer is part and parcel of that value stream because we can't get that value until they're satisfied with what we've delivered to them. All the work. So these are systems. Maybe this is maybe I'm hosted on Amazon Web Services, and this is the deployment of my web application on AWS. So parts of AWS that we use are part of the system. The people that do the development are part of that, of course. The people that define the work are part of that. The people that help us with security and other elements of the governance model are part of that. It's all of the above. That's what the value stream is, the people that do the work, the systems, and the flow of information and materials. And what we discover when we think about that is that value flows across our organizational boundaries. It's not the case that people want to just buy this, typically, right? If this is, I'll just say this is a testing organization, right? People don't buy our test. This is a development organization. People don't buy our development. This is a product management function. People don't buy any of that. The value that is created in the organization is not contained inside an organizational geographic boundary. The value that's created flows across the organization however it flows. So when we think about the value stream, we think about what are we delivering now? Right? We're delivering an e-commerce solution set. We're delivering this new capability via mobile. Well, that flows through this organization, not this one, not this one, not this one. And that means that oftentimes we have to think about how we're organized, and we need to create things like agile release trains as adhocracies to address the flow of real value through the process. Now, we're talking about value streams in the generic sense. We've described them as this set of steps, right? A trigger to an endpoint. But value doesn't realize itself. This is the abstraction that allows us to understand the way value flows. The people are included in the value stream, but how we organize to deliver value is our next step. So let's jump forward and talk a little bit about agile release trains. I mentioned very briefly that they're optimized for about 50 to 125 people. There's some kind of laws of sociology that help define that, not to mention how many people can you really work with on a nearly daily basis or even a iteration or PI basis and know what they're doing and be able to really help and frankly want to be able to help. So if you have very small value streams, maybe there's a series of products. Maybe we build desktop security software and there's 30 people here and 20 people here and 10 people here. Well, there's your individual products. Well, certainly we can think of those as individual value streams, but goodness, we can handle all of those with a single art. So long as they're related products and there's some dependencies that we want to manage, we'll just collapse them that way. So in some enterprises, and maybe in the smaller enterprise or in the smaller business unit, that's a fine model. Other times we come up with this kind of unique case, and maybe this is the simplest case to consider, which is it takes 100 people to build that particular system, okay? In which case, our value stream and the art are the same thing. That's a one-for-one mapping. So we don't need to think about collapsing value streams into arts, or the next case, which is the deeper case, which is that if it's a really big value stream, as I mentioned earlier, I had an email just the other day from somebody that has about 800 people deployed on a single value stream in a large kind of healthcare information system. And they think of that information system as really one large solution. They could think about it differently, but they don't. They think about it as a single solution. Well, it's going to take a number of arts, right? It's going to take 7 or 8 or 9 arts to realize that. So we want to budget for that value stream. It's a single budget construct, but we want to divide that up into arts for implementation. Arts are the people. They're the people that actually create the value. The value stream is the construct that describes, from a customer's perspective, the value they receive, but we need to deploy people to deliver value, and the construct that captures that is the Agile release train, which we've elaborated on at length. This last case here is kind of an interesting one, and it's frankly, it's the funnest one to ponder. It's not necessarily the easiest one to ponder, but if you have the case, the question starts to become, how do you organize these arts? Are they just at random? We take our 800 people and say, okay, 100's a good number, so we'll have 8 arts. Well, that's really silly. We have to figure out within this solution what the capability areas are, and we want to align our arts around that area. So the general case in terms of splitting value streams into multiple arts may be by customer or market segment, right? If there's some significant differentiation in the customer or market segment, we may want to split it that way. Of course, there's going to be some common elements, but in any case, thinking about the customer directly is a good way. By a set of solution capabilities, right? The capability for mobile buying of stuff that's available in our warehouse could be its own separate art, right? The ability to access our retail inventory via mobile, maybe that's a capability area. Less desirable, but often the case, and very typically the case, especially for systems that run on single platforms, is that we can organize around subsystems and applications and components. Now, that's a component orientation, and that means that real value, okay, means that multiple arts are involved. So it's not the ideal case, but I'll also tell you, I mentioned the example the other day of, the JVM for a set of thermostats. So in that example, maybe move that up a notch. One big platform supports the entire value stream. Well, it's not unreasonable at all to say, let's create a specific art around that. Now, if I go in and start creating an art for the front end, an art for the middleware, an art for the back end, art for the data warehouse, well, that's going to be kind of tough because then every new capability is going to span all of those. But there are places where we want to have dedicated people. So it's not unusual, it's certainly not illegal, and it's not unlikely that you're going to have some subset of that. And then perhaps even, I wouldn't say more unusual, let's just say that there's a step in the value stream. I'm familiar with one example where there's about 1,000 people in the enterprise, and they're mostly involved in, I'll just say, geospatial data transformation, adding entities to locations, producing mapping, et cetera. And there's a bunch of people who do what I would describe generically as, ETL, extract, transform, and load, meaning we take raw data that comes in and we create great data that you can then use to monetize. Well, those people work together. So there's a case where a single step in the value stream could be a fine art. Now you might say, well, there's a bunch of handoffs. Well, there are a bunch of handoffs. There's a handoff of a bunch of raw data to a bunch of great data, but it's not an inappropriate set of handoffs. So does that handoff have a transaction cost? Of course it does. But if this is unlike stuff, this is unlike stuff, and this is like stuff, converting from unlike to like is a fine thing. So there's an example where the subset of value is via enabling flows, or in this case, a value stream segment. Other considerations may play a role. We do see these. They're generally less desirable, but maybe you're working with a different source of funding. Maybe that's an outsourced shop and they're organized differently, and we have a limited ability to affect their structure. We say, well, okay, then we really do need to treat this as a bit of a black box. It's not opaque to us. We're going to have an input and an output. So, perhaps a little less desirable. Same goes for location, geography, natural language, application language, et cetera. They're not as good a consideration as these. I guess if you look at these, you start to see, kind of preference, higher preference down to lower preference. But we have to be practical and realistic about these things. And there's a group of 150 people in some outsourcing company. Maybe it's even our own division, but they're really good at doing one subset of the value stream. Well, then we'll form an art around that. No sense in having a fight about the fact that can they deliver value or not. Well, they can. They take inputs and they convert it to outputs. So it's not quite as pretty as this case, but it's not an unusual case necessarily. This is not a trivial process. Understanding your value streams and dividing into arts isn't trivial at all, and it's something that defies armchair quarterbacking. So I encourage you to think deeply about this problem. Your SPCs, your SAFE program consultants, are trained in this process. The value stream article, additional artifacts we're developing around the value stream will help you do that. But this is how we get started with SAFE, is understanding first the flow of value through your enterprise and then how we're going to organize our solution development people into end-to-end value. So it looks awfully pretty when each art can say, oh, we took that idea and we were able to deliver and monetize that. And there are other cases as well as I've described.